So just one bite won't hurt, right? It seems harmless, even helpful when you want your child to try something new. But what if that one small moment of pressure is actually the reason that they're refusing even more? I'm Christine Miroddi Yoder, pediatric feeding therapist, creator of the Unlocking Meal Times method that we use, and someone who has worked with hundreds of families stuck in the same pattern, the same loop. Like, she used to eat it, now she won't look at it. We tell him to take a bite, but he always resists. We're trying everything, bribes, rewards, consequences, and none of it actually is working. So today we're going to talk about this common mistake that all well-meaning parents are making and why it is backfiring almost every time. So forcing a bite, whether it's subtle, like, why don't you just give it a quick try for mommy? Or like a more direct, like, you're not leaving this table until you take this bite. But pressure usually does more harm than good. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through why pressuring a bite can actually make more resistance, which is the opposite goal that we have when we're asking them to take a bite, right? What's actually happening in your child's brain and body, and what to do instead. Very importantly, right? There's no point in me telling you what not to do if I'm not going to give you the advice of how to replace it, right? So strategies that build curiosity instead of conflict. Okay, so number one, our first one, number one reason why forcing a bite backfires, it reinforces fear and disconnects them from their hunger cues. So when you push a bite, especially with tension in your voice or like an urgency in your body language, it tells your child, I don't trust your body. I need you to override what you're feeling to make me happy, right? It becomes very much about what we want and not always what's best for them, right? Because what happens next is they stop listening to themselves and they start just kind of like looking at your reaction. Like, what does mom want me to do next? What is dad expecting me to say or do next, right? It doesn't become about the food anymore. It becomes about either pleasing you or sometimes being more combative with you, right? So over time, this is going to actually erode their own internal compass about what it feels like to be uncomfortable or hungry or full or curious, because they're only focusing on the performance of meeting your expectations, or actually, right, in more defiant kids, doing the opposite of their expectations. Like, if they want me to do it, I'm going to just do the opposite. So it creates pressure, which leads to stress, which usually leads to shutdown completely. It teaches that trying food becomes about pleasing you and not about their body or what's good for them. Okay, now, reason number two that forcing a bite can backfire. Okay, like I said, pressure leads to stress, which leads to shutdown. So trying a new food, trying anything new, honestly, takes a little bit of courage, especially for a child who's maybe more naturally overwhelmed by things or has more sensitivities than others. When they feel pressured, even subtly, their nervous system basically says, not safe. They can go into that fight or flight, right? So when your body goes into the I'm not safe fight or flight mode, it shuts down your appetite, right? Because think about it. I don't know when, but very far back in history, when people were like hunting animals and tigers and things like that, fight or flight was made, right? It's part of our genetics. It's part of our being human, because we need to go into fight or flight if we have to run from a tiger or a bear, right? So when that happens, right, we know, science knows that your body starts to shut down things that are not important at the time. The only thing that's important is getting cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream so that you can run away. Now, sitting with a plate of broccoli is not the same as running from a bear. However, The body doesn't really recognize the differences. It just knows that it's in fight or flight. So when it's in that mode, it does certain processes, like it shuts down hunger. There's no point in being hungry if you have to run away from a bear and save your life. Again, it's not the same. We know that. Logically, we know that it's not the same as running away from a bear is getting presented with a plate of carrots. But again, the body is going to respond in that same way, right? It's going to shut down appetite, increase their resistance, and it's only really going to create negative associations between the food and you, the person applying the pressure. Right. So that's why so many parents will tell me the more I try to do, the worse it gets. And it's because you're trying to help, but sometimes you might be pushing in a way that's actually counterproductive and leading to more shutdown. Right. So that's why it's really important to know what to do and what not to do, what to say and what not to say, so that instead of pushing kids into the fight or flight, we actually push them the opposite way and into the curious stage, which we are going to get to in a little bit. Okay. But I have one more reason why forcing a bite can backfire. Okay. So before we do that, if you don't know how severe your child's feeding issue is, make sure you've taken our quiz at the pickeaterstest.com. It will give you their level, because you know what? I'm going to be perfectly honest. Some people have told me just encouraging them to take a bite actually has worked. But I am going to preface that by saying that it totally depends on your child's level, right? If they are fearful, forcing a bite will, I could almost guarantee 100% of the time, never work. But if they're in the curious stage of eating and you encourage them gently to take a bite, they might do it, but it's because of the level. So it's really important for you to know what level your child is at, so you can know what language to use and not use around them. That's really important. So if you want to get your child's level, go to the pickeaterstest.com and find out, so that you are not making this mistake. Okay, so reason number 3 that forcing a bite backfires. Okay, so it actually, right, we kind of touched on this a little bit. It teaches them that trying food is more about pleasing you, right? So when the goal is to take a bite, you shift the meaning of the meal. Okay, it's no longer about being curious or am I hungry enough to try this? It becomes all about your approval. If I do this, mom will smile. If I don't, dad will be disappointed. Trying food becomes performance-based and not a choice anymore. And that's the opposite of what we want. We want internal, intrinsic motivation, right? Because what might happen is, even if you get them to take the bite because of what you said, it might not lead them to wanting to eat it. It might not lead them to enjoying the food or asking for it again. A lot of times it just makes them push it away further, right? So what can we do instead, right? Because if this is your child, like I said, if they're curious, you might get more success with this versus if your child is in the fearful stage, right? So what can we do instead? What can we do for these kids that are in the fearful and stuck stage, that using these phrases like try it, take a bite, you might like it, are only going to make it worse, right? So instead, I encourage you to shift to playful exploration, right? We're going to replace the words like try a bite with let's play with it, right? Talk about how it feels, smells, how it crunches, what sounds it makes. Ask them if it reminds them of anything, a color, a shape, a sound, or maybe it reminds them of a place, right? Certain foods might remind us of a trip we took, or grandma's house, or their friend's house, or camp, right? Like certain smells will bring back certain memories, things like that, right? We're changing the language to make them curious. And I know a lot of food's expensive these days. I totally get it. But food play doesn't necessarily have to be about wasting food, right? And think about it. When you're learning about something, there is like a process. Like when you're learning to draw, you go through paper, right? And when you're learning to cook, you're going to use food. And when you're learning to eat food, you're going to go through food as well. So you're building a foundation of safety that's going to lead to eventual chewing, tasting, swallowing. But you have to build that foundation. It's like you can't build a second story of a house without a foundation and a first floor, right? So you really have to start from the ground up here. There's ways that we can maybe reutilize some of that food, or if you have a dog or a pet, taking the scraps of it and giving it to them if you really hate food waste. But, I urge you to shift your perspective on food play as just wasting food. And you can even do food play on foods that are, kind of like half out the door, or, maybe you got something and you didn't it wasn't like the right brand or something, and now you have it in the house. But use that for food play, because a lot of times when you start with food play, they're not going to be eating it the first time because it's exposure, it's new, right? So very unlikely that they are going to try it the first time anyway. But you can incorporate it into play perhaps in a way that might give it almost like a second life. So I'm just trying to help you like reframe your thoughts on if you're concerned about food waste. Okay. My other tip, strategy 2, normalize you're not ready yet. Instead of, you don't like it, huh? How about we say, that's okay. Maybe your body isn't ready for it today, right? That's a very different shift. It's a different perspective. Okay. Instead of, why aren't you eating this? Say, you're still learning about this one and it's going to be here when you're ready. Okay. Keep these types of phrases, keep the door open. It builds trust and it honors their sort of that developmental process of learning, right? It kind of gets them curious. It doesn't shut the door to anything. And it doesn't label anything as good or bad. You like it, you don't, right? And my next tip about staying curious, not controlling, kind of piggybacks on this, right? If they're not going to taste that food, get curious. What about this food might be turning them off, right? So instead of getting mad and shutting down and getting frustrated, I want you to flip and play detective. Okay, so is it too sticky for them? I tend to notice the sticky food seems to be harder. Like we're looking for patterns here. Does it smell too strong? Does your mouth feel tired today? Did they just have a very long day at camp? Like, is this maybe just like too overwhelming to try something new because they're really tired and they're just not in the right mood, right? So try to finding patterns. That is going to help. And it's going to also shift your perspective again about them just being difficult or them being defiant or, they're just not cooperating. It's more like, well, what is stopping them? Like get curious as a parent. Okay. So let's just wrap up. So let's go through, there's 3 reasons forcing a bite can backfire. So reason number 1, forcing a bite could backfire. It reinforces fear and it disconnects them from their hunger cues. Then we have pressure leads to stress, which leads to shutdown, right? Which is that body going into fight or flight, like I'm not safe. And number 3, it teaches them that food and trying new foods is about pleasing you and not about them. It's definitely not about waiting until they're ready or they're curious. Okay. So we're going to do 3 strategies to shift to instead of trying to force a bite. We're going to shift to playful exploration. Okay. We're going to normalize saying like things like you're not ready yet or you're learning about it. So we're going to shift our language. And then you, as the parent, is going to stay curious. Why are they refusing it? Can I find a pattern? Does it have a strong smell? Is this too unlike all of the other foods in their diet, right? What kind of reasons can we come up with that might be holding them back? Because that might give you a clue on how to actually move forward. Okay, so the next time you feel tempted, and I know you will, because I also am very often tempted to say, just try a bite, just pause. What am I really doing here by saying that? Is this for them or is it for me? Because if you want them to trust their body, to be confident with food, to be an independent, curious, excited eater, you have to step back so that they can step forward. All right, so remember, if you haven't taken the quiz, please get your child's level because it is really important. The language that we use at the different levels can really make or break whether our kids progress with food or start to regress with food. So make sure you know your child's level before you start implementing any strategies at home. All right, again, that's the pickyeaterstest.com, and we will see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.